Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with JTS Rabbinical student Claire Davidson Bruder.
This evening's topic of conversation came out of the fact that I am really dreading Purim this year. And I feel like a total Grinch. How can I possibly be so boring and so anti-fun to dread Purim? So I think for me, there are two reasons I don't always look forward to Purim. The first is that I struggle a little bit with just how wrapped up Purim gets in drinking culture. I feel like I am back in college and everyone is going to a frat party and I want to hang out with my friends and drink tea and read a book. We're going to talk a little bit about that. The second reason I get a little grinchy about Purim is that I worry because, as Cantor Chorney mentioned, I do a lot of work with kids and teens. I get worried that we put so much emphasis on Purim as the fun holiday that it really kind of comes back to stab us in the back when we're talking about other holidays. We forget to make other holidays fun too. I'm very pro silliness, and I don't think it should be confined to one day a year. And I think that, coupled with the fact that Purim isn't a Chag, it doesn't have the same holiday rules that we get, on Passover, Rosh Hashanah, what have you, it just feels a little less special to me. And so for all these reasons, when Purim comes around, start whining. I ask my wife, do we really have to go to shul? Can't we just stay home and go to bed early? And so tonight's shiur is coming out of my desire to turn my mindset around and find some deeper spiritual meaning in Purim and to get myself excited for Thursday. Let's hand around the sheets. So the first teaching on the sheet, which I'll start talking about now because many people are familiar with it, comes from the Talmud and reads, Rava said, one is obligated to become inebriated on Purim until he cannot tell the difference between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordechai. So this is where we see kind of the root of Purim's drinking culture. I'll also add in my little bit of grinchiness that this also comes with an aspect of anxiety. One piece of my professional puzzle that Rabbi Chorney did not mention is that I, among other things, am the resident director for the List College Dormitory, which is JTS's undergrad dorm. And so when Simchat Torah and Purim roll around, we're making calls to EMTs. We're worrying about our students' safety. And so what I want to offer you is a way to understand not being able to tell the difference between Haman and Mordechai that isn't necessarily reliance on getting totally drunk. So if you look at the second source on your sheet, you'll see straight out of the Megillah. And so on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, when the king's command and decree were to be executed, the very day on which the enemies of the Jews had expected to get them in their power, the opposite happened, and the Jews got their enemies in power. And so to me, we don't have to be confused about who Haman is and who Mordechai is in order to flip the script. Rather, we can think about what it means to flip the script. V'nahafoch hu is what we read in Megillat Esther. V'nahafoch hu, the opposite happened. And so when I read this pasuk, I find that it can inspire me to take a moment and think about our world as it is. And I just want to invite you to join me in a little exercise of imagination. This might be like a little touchy-feely in here, but that's okay. I want to invite people to close your eyes if you're comfortable. And think for a moment about something in this world that you believe to be unfair. Something in this world, it could be in, current events, or it could be something in your life, someone who has treated you a certain way. Something unfair. And now, I want you to think about the feelings that come with that. The feelings that come with the unfairness, the uncertainty, the fear, the sadness, maybe even the despair, when we feel like we can't change the way things are. And now, I want to invite you, nahafochu, to imagine the opposite. Imagine if this unfairness, if this inequality, if this mistreatment did not exist, whether that's in the world or in your life. How would you feel? How would you feel if the world were upside down, if the situation were different? To me, it is this feeling that Purim inspires. And you can open your eyes now, unless you are lost in your fantasy of the world as better than it is and you want to stay there. To me, Purim serves as an invitation to imagine things as the opposite of what they are. And in my experience, especially in rabbinical school, adults take things too seriously. There's so little opportunity for silliness, and there's so little opportunity in our lives for imagination. It feels like, okay, as an adult, I can have creativity. I can solve problems at work. I can solve problems in the home. I can write. I can be creative. But the muscle of imagination is one we do not flex. And sure, there are substances that can do that imagining for us, that can change our feelings for us, that can allow us to enter into a self that is far less self-conscious, far more in touch with our inner child. I hope you'll excuse me really for this touchy-feely language. But we actually don't have to rely on alcohol or any other substances to confuse our brains into thinking the world is different or opposite than what it is, because we can choose to imagine that. And so to that end, I've included at the bottom here a little piece from a woman named Ariel Krull, who is the founder and spiritual leader of Sela, which is a Jewish addiction organization and resource in Brooklyn. And Ariel is also in school to become a rabbi. And this is part of Sela's annual guide that they publish about how to celebrate Purim in a way that can be inclusive to those who are sober. And she writes, consider the idea that intoxication on this holiday may bring us to a place of wonder might be a well-masked invitation to see people in ways we do not usually imagine, including ourselves. It very well may be a message to us to see the potential in our world, including our own. we should become so intoxicated in the potential that is within us that we open up our minds to seeing new unfolding truths and our hearts to accepting them. I'm curious to hear, before we move on to kind of the second of our three ideas, how this lands for you. Do you feel convinced that this is what the exhortation to become intoxicated represents? And I'm curious, if not, where you see kind of the point. What is the point of getting drunk on Purim? Yeah, there's no obligation, nothing in the Torah telling us to get drunk on Purim, but there is this piece in the Talmud, which we generally see as our compendium of law, that is encouraging us and even saying that we are obligated. What do you mean? We're reading it right here. Sure. Well, what I'm trying to make a case for is I disagree with it too, is what I'm saying, but I can't pretend like it's not there. So what I'm trying to do is offer a way for us to interpret what the meaning is behind the words and be able to pursue the feeling they're trying to capture without necessarily having to get so drunk we forget ourselves and our story. Well, that's not what I'm saying. So that's what I'm trying to talk about. All right, any other? Yeah.
Microphone.
Oh, sorry, I forgot about that. Yeah.
So I think that the concept described here is important for people who have problems with substances. Having said that, I want to speak up in favor of inebriation on Purim.
Please.
Which is that it's not only to be able to forget the difference between Haman and Mordecai, but it's actually to celebrate. And it's actually important that we have a holiday that is fun and celebratory and may include getting hammered, right? And, this reads a little bit to me like, you want to talk about touchy-feely, like when I was closer to your age and people would say, oh, I'm high on life. I'm like, dude, take a shot of Slivovitz. It'll do some good, right? So I think this is great for people with substance abuse, but I do think that having a lot to drink on Purim is also a good thing.
So I don't disagree with you, and I want to be clear, I'm not in any way trying to cast judgment on people who do get super drunk on Purim, except maybe the freshmen who live in my dorm. But to me, the question for me as a rabbinical student who doesn't really like drinking is, how can I make meaning out of the component of Purim that is alcohol related and find the deeper meaning? Because everything you're describing is fun, but I guess where I'm sitting is that I feel like I have so many opportunities to have fun with my friends, to go out, to drink, to dance, whatever. I don't need a Jewish holiday to tell me I have to do that. And I think that's where I struggle with taking Purim seriously in a spiritual way. Does that make sense? And this is like, again, part of the reason I'm asking you guys all of these questions is because I actually don't know what the answer is, and because I am here to try to learn from you. Yeah, I mean, it can definitely, I hear you. And we are reading in the Talmud that it is telling us that. I know that it feels confusing and it feels hard to square with how we think and how we feel. And that's exactly what Jewish learning is about, is negotiating this tension in between what we see in the text and what we feel in our hearts. Yeah, AJ.
And I am going to borrow this because I've been instructed to do so in the past. And I have no idea whether it's working or not, but I'd like to kind of turn and address, I think it really does address where you're going with this, which is, why is Purim such a hidden holiday? It seems like there's a lot of not just implied misrepresentation or obscuration. God's name is not mentioned, et cetera, et cetera. And this issue here of being so intoxicated that you can't tell the difference between the good guy and the bad guy, or maybe even the difference between good and evil. As human beings might define those two things, whatever God may define them as, we really don't understand. So where is Purim taking us as we try to grapple with that issue of, this is going way beyond, it's transcending why do bad things happen to good people. But it takes that question and really starts to make it, morph it into a psychedelic trip.
Yes, thank you for that. It is also the perfect transition to the next page. We're going to take a brief break from Purim and talk for a couple of minutes about next week's Parsha, Ki Tisa, as a way to enter into this. So AJ brings up the question, the fundamental, foundational human question: why do bad things happen to good people? I've been doing recently a lot of reading and a lot of work on trauma theory and the ways in which trauma theory is developed by psychologists interacts with our Bible and with our understanding of it. So there is this psychologist named Dr. Janoff Butler. Oh my gosh, I'm panicking, you guys. I've forgotten the name. It's Dr. Janoff Bullman. Dr. Janoff Bullman tells us that the reason we ask this question, why do bad things happen to good people, is because we all either have or want to have three fundamental assumptions about ourselves and the world around us. The first assumption is that the world is a good and benevolent place. The second assumption is that life has meaning. And the third assumption is that we as human beings are worthy of goodness. And so when we take these assumptions that we either hold or, as she argues, instinctually as humans want to hold within ourselves, we enter this quagmire where we cannot understand why bad things happen to good people. If the world is a benevolent place, bad things should not happen to good people. And so many people who undergo various forms of trauma end up finding ways, small ways, to blame themselves for what they're going through. And so when I read our texts, whether it's the Megillah or whether it's Parshat Ki Tisa, what I am thinking about is those who wrote down this text and what they were going through, because these texts were developed in the late 6th century BCE during the Babylonian exile, during an enormous trauma for the Israelites. And when I try to put myself into those shoes, I can't help but imagine that the Israelites must have felt like we did something wrong. We did something to deserve this. God is punishing us for something. And I think that we can see that theme reflected in a lot of our texts. So in Parshat Ki Tisa this week, we read about the story of the golden calf. The Israelites, led by Aaron, their priest, build an idol and worship an idol because they're worried that God has withdrawn from them. And they're seeking protection. They're scared and they're seeking protection. And God tries to punish them very, very harshly. He decides he's going to kill all of them. He's going to wipe all of the Israelites off the face of the earth except Moses. And he's going to create a new line of descendants from Moses, who will be God's chosen people. And Moses, like Abraham many years before him, argues back against God. And he is able to convince God to rescind that punishment. But every time I read that parsha, I can't help but imagine the way those writing down the version of the text we have today must have felt to think that building one idol, making one mistake, is something that God could justifiably kill them over. And so we turn to page 2 and to the hidden face of God and to God's anger against the Israelites. Also, as AJ mentioned, God's name is not used in the Megillah. God is not mentioned in the Megillah. What can that possibly mean? And so, in Chulin, we're asked, so where in the Torah can we find an allusion to what then happens in the Megillah? And Rav Matana replies with a verse, or 2 verses. Then my anger shall be kindled against them on that day, and I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured, and many evils and troubles shall come upon them, so that they will say in that day, have not these evils come upon us because our God is not among us? And I will hide my face on that day for all the evil which they have wrought, in that they are turned to other gods. And you can see right below, I've included 3 psukim, or 2 psukim, the same 2 psukim, if you want to read them in the Hebrew. And so this is seeming to imply that the reason God doesn't show up in the Megillah is because he is hiding his face from the Jews of the time, because he is angry with them for their misbehavior. Yeah, we're getting there.
And that is that God is doing everything, at least according to the Haggadah. Ani v'lo malach, ani v'lo shaliach, the Holy One, blessed be He, Himself, etc., etc. And it even says, B'chvodo v'atzmo, God is doing everything. What makes Purim distinct is here we're left to our own, to our wiles, to a leadership that's reluctant to assume leadership, that has to deal with the world in a very basic way without God to intervene in a salvational way. Now, in a very real sense, that's where Purim is. And the rabbis are saying God is there even by hiding his face, but the Megillah is essentially saying you're on your own, now do it and figure out how to help to protect yourself, preserve yourself, get yourself through the combination. So it's a matter of political wiles, leadership that assumes a position, and ultimately self-defense. It's a world without God. And Yitz Greenberg would say that this is a world in which it's the third stage, in which we are now the senior partners and God is saying time to grow up. And just in comment to your first element, to raise a healthy kid, we have to say 2 things to the kid that are both lies. We have to say the world is safe and we're here to protect you. And the world is not necessarily safe, and we cannot protect the kid, at least all the way through. So when a kid grows up, he understands the world is not safe, necessarily, and there's no one there to protect you. Congratulations, you're an adult, now protect yourself.
Yeah.
Where's God fit in that?
Good things happen to bad people also. I mean, the reverse is true. We question when bad things happen to good people, but the fact is good things happen to bad people. I don't know how many examples of that there are in the Torah necessarily, but people have had their share of yuccas, you know, and that's what they're asked to, so it works both ways.
I'm trying to connect this in my head to the previous source about becoming so inebriated on Purim, and I'm kind of struggling, particularly because I noticed in the first stanza, if you will, the word yain isn't specifically mentioned, at least that I saw. Hebrew is probably better than mine. But so the idea of becoming inebriated on wine doesn't fully read to me. It might be a different kind of inebriation. I know the vocab probably refers to drinking specifically, which is why that's in parentheses. But the thing that I'm wondering is if that idea of drinking to excess almost is that sort of traumatic response. We're in the Babylonian exile. We think that God has forsaken us, so now we want to institute a holiday in which we drink as a kind of way of avoiding our problems, which feels very sad to me, but it seems also kind of very human.
Yeah, I think the question we continue into here is how to understand God's withdrawal from human affairs in Megillat Esther. So you brought up, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting your name. Michael brings up one interpretation, which is that this is maybe a little bit God pushing us out of the nest, promoting us to senior partners, and kind of putting the onus on us. And I like that. I really do like that. And I feel much more comfortable with it than what I'm reading in this text here from Chulin, which is telling us that the reason that God's face is hidden is because it's a punishment for a misdeed, is because God is angry. And I think part of the reason that I find that so challenging is that the way Megillat Esther happens, without God's name specifically mentioned, looks a lot like the way our lives happen today. You know, our canonical Bible closed, and we stopped having this interventionist God swooping into human affairs. And to me, this text feels almost heartbreaking when I compare it to our world today. Because to me, the question then becomes, is the reason that God is withdrawn from the world, first of all, is God withdrawn from the world today? And then if God is withdrawn from the world today, is that because we, as humans, as a Jewish community, as individuals, whatever, have done something to arouse his ire? And so, Michael, I like that.
And God withdrew. Well, we did pretty good on our own. And we end up in a winning strategy. The winning strategy is we end up in power, we end up secure. Mordechai ends up being the prime minister, and Esther the queen. Not a bad thing. If that's the hidden face of God, it doesn't manifest anger.
Right. But so then what I don't understand, because I agree with you on that, right? We understand Purim to be about the hidden face of God, not the turned away face of God. But then what is this text doing? Why is this text here trying to tell us that it is anger?
Well, look, the text is based on a theology of reward and punishment. And that's an essential part of the prophetic motif. It's what we see in Deuteronomy. It's what we see in the prophets of ancient Israel. It's what we see in sin and repentance. So it's based on that theology. He's trying to make sense of what's happening. In a way, the Megillah undermines that notion And especially if you consider it anger, then how are we going to deal with the fact that the reality is its success? And, bravo, you won.
Right.
Not a bad thing. Let me just add, there's a line by Emil Fackenheim, who is the great Canadian Jewish philosopher, who bases himself on the notion, we won't go into it, but the notion of what is the Jewish condition today? And he said the tradition is that Nachshon ben Aminadav walked in to the sea, and only when the sea reached his nostrils did the sea begin to part. And Fackenheim comments, you want to know the Jewish condition today? Welcome, my fellow swimmers.
You want to know the Jewish condition today? Welcome, my fellow swimmers. That's a hard and heavy message, and
Maybe not a true one.
Certainly not. And so I want us to turn to our next page as we consider our spiritual imperative to find God's hidden countenance. We can't, at least I feel, you're welcome to disagree with me later after Mariv, because I don't want to put us behind schedule, but I don't think we can just accept a God who has withdrawn his countenance, but rather we have to continue to pursue God and to pursue a world where we are able to see the divine. And so we return to Purim, and we return to the question of what Purim can do for us and how we can make meaning out of it that adds on to the fun we find within it. And so our last source on page 3 tells us about an incident involving Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yoshua, who becomes ill and faints. When he wakes up, his father asks him, "What did you see when you were not with us, when you were unconscious?" Yosef says to him, "I saw an inverted world. Those who are above were below, and those who are below were above." He's jumbled. He doesn't know what to make of this, but his father, a sage, tells him, "You have seen a clear world." The clear world, the truth about the world as it should be, cannot exist if we can only look at the world for what we see in front of us. And so, my own kavanah, my own intention for Purim this year is to work to see the world as inverted, to work to see a world that is completely different from how it is today. Is it better? Is it worse? I don't know. But I'm hoping that in doing so, not only will Purim feel for me like it has a purpose, but that it will shatter my vision of the status quo, shatter my assumptions, and allow me some creativity, as I hope it will allow you to think and to imagine what our world can be. Thank you.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, go to www.tbala.org.